This is our teaching video for the third Sunday of Easter, entitled Scales, Fish, and Redirected Passion. There are two stories in the readings that we'll have on Sunday that you can go through in preparation. The first is from the book of Acts, and that's chapter 9, 1 through 20, and this is the conversion of Saul. So if you remember, Saul becomes Paul, Saint Paul. And a famous story, especially the road to Damascus and the scales that fall from his eyes. The second story is going to be from the Gospel of John, another resurrection appearance. And we might say both of these are stories of resurrection appearances, the living Christ coming and changing lives. And so that's what we want. We want the risen Christ to come to us, to change our lives and to give us the abundance of the work of his mission. Now, this text I've actually talked about in a previous teaching video, so if you want to know more about this text, particularly the encounter that Jesus has with Simon Peter, I'd invite you to go back onto the YouTube channel or the church website and look at the video from February the 3rd. Now, when we encounter Saul in the reading from Acts, he is breathing murderous threats against the followers of Jesus. And in fact, you have to remember, Christianity was not first called Christianity, it was simply called the Way, capital W, the Way. Christians did not get the name Christian until later in the book of Acts, when in Antioch they were called Christianos, followers of Christ, or just people related to Christ. And so the name of Jesus, or the title of Jesus, became the nickname for the people who followed him. So the Christianity went from the Way to Christianity. Not unlike, say Moonies, followers of Reverend Moon in Korea, were simply called Moonies by his name, and so Christians actually are called Christians because of the one whom we follow. Now, this is a medieval picture showing Saint Paul, or before he was Paul, Saul, at the martyrdom of Stephen. This is the first person who dies for the faith, and you see Stephen dressed in the garb of a medieval cleric, and here's Saul holding the cloaks of those who then will stone Stephen to death. And so one of the things to recognize is Saul is very similar to someone like Moses, who in fact had been a murderer, or had been complicit in acts of great rage and violence. And so he wasn't just sitting at a desk job, but rather Jesus had to redirect his passion. Of course, some very famous paintings on Paul when he has his conversion. These are both by the artist Caravaggio, who we see because he paints so many of these biblical themes. Here's St. Paul almost presented like a Greek or a Roman, having fallen off his horse and having the vision of Jesus that we have in Acts 9. And here's another picture done by the same artist where, his eyes, his sight is affected. And so one of the things you can think about is, how is it that Jesus opens the eyes of those who follow? Well, if you think about some of the points I just made, one of the things I said is that Paul was very passionate. He was a very passionate person. Especially when he was Saul, he was murderous in his passion for the truth of his religion. He saw those who followed Jesus as very dangerous. And so one of the questions we might ask you is, what are you passionate about? What is it that really gets you going? And then ask yourself, how does this fit with being a follower of Jesus? Of course, I always seem to forget one or two words when I do this. How does it fit with you being a follower of Jesus? It may very well be that the resurrected Christ needs to meet you and redirect your passion, refocus you. And what that means is refocus you on the mission. Remember what we talked about last Sunday? The mission is, as the Father has sent me, so now I send you to proclaim forgiveness of sins. And in fact, we had that language of binding sins and releasing sins, which the church calls the office of the keys. And that's why one of the things you should hear when you come into church is talk of sin being forgiven. And the reason the church sometimes talks about sin being retained isn't because the church is on a power trip, though in some places it is. But rather, you can't just pretend like the wound isn't there. So if you go to your doctor and you have a cut on your arm, he can't say, and lo, there is no cut. No, there is a wound, and we have to deal with it. And so forgiveness is serious business that requires a certain kind of wisdom. And so God will redirect your passion towards the mission of being sent. And indeed, this is what the word apostle means. I always quiz the confirmation students. What does that mean? It just simply means one who is sent. So Paul's passion is transformed by the encounter with Jesus. And if you don't know the story, it's Jesus saying, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And Saul is so surprised. Now the second thing that we talked about related to Saul is the question of having vision. You'll notice one of the features of the story is that the meeting with Jesus blinds him, but rather the meeting with Jesus actually opens his vision. So one of the things you don't know is how well you can see. Now you might say, I see fine, or I have contacts, or I've had LASIK, but we're not talking about seeing physical things. We're talking about seeing God's future. We're talking about having spiritual perception, and you may be blind, which is why your passion may need to be redirected. So as Jesus, the risen Christ, encounters us, and there's this very powerful moment in Acts chapter 9, how is it that passion is reshaped, but also vision is opened? And as a church, this is really a question we're very eager to answer. God, what is the vision that you're opening for us? Open our eyes to see your future that you want to see for this church. And how can we be sent according to this mission? How can we dedicate our passion, dedicate our resources to being part of this work? One final little detail you'll sometimes hear about Saul on the road to Damascus. So this is actually the road. Paul sets out from here, crosses by Galilee, and then up by Damascus, just south, is where Paul has his vision. And then the story unfolds after that. And if you have a chance to read it, God asks very difficult things of people. God says, go and find Saul, and the guy that's praying is like, no thanks, I know who he is. And God essentially has to say, no you don't. He's my instrument. And so sometimes the difficult answer of following Jesus is God changes our perceptions about the people we feel we know most intimately. So you might think about that too. Has God ever had to change your perception of someone you knew intimately? And as God changes them, your view of them has to change as well. Now the second story that we have this morning, or on Sunday morning, will be John chapter 21. And this is where Jesus now has come from Jerusalem, which is down here, and they're back in Galilee, on the Sea of Galilee. And in fact, the name in Hebrew is called kind of the harp, Sea of the Harp, because it's shaped like an ancient harp. Galilee is, of course, this region, but it's also called the Sea of Tiberias because of this city here. And in fact, I think that's what it's called today, the Sea of Tiberias. It's about 8 by 13, so it's a fairly large-sized lake or sea. And if you remember all the stories of the disciples going in the boat and Jesus being asleep in the boat, or them fishing, this is actually a model of a boat that they dug up, which was a major archaeological find. This is probably exactly the same kind of boat that Jesus and the apostles would have used. So when Jesus finds them fishing in this resurrection appearance, they're probably using a boat just like this. And so, when the nets are too big to bring in, a boat this size, it's not like a rowboat. We're talking about a major catch. What's great about this story from John 21 is the opening lines where Peter says, I'm going fishing. Jesus is resurrected from the dead, but they're not sure what that means for them. What are they supposed to do? How are they supposed to fill their time? And so what do? They go back to the thing they used to do. They go back to the work they used to have. So Peter says, I'm going fishing. And the other disciples say, we will too. One of the things that we have to deal with in Easter and these Easter encounters, and by the way, this is the third time that Jesus has now appeared to them, is Jesus has to keep coming back because we keep going back to old habits. Now, I don't even have to tell you how this works, right? There are certain things that you've done that you've always done. There are certain ways that you spend your time, that you've always spent your time this way. And you might say, yes, I believe that Easter's happened, but so what? What does that mean for me? And so the disciples go back to what they've always done. Peter says, I'm just going fishing. I know how to do that. And so then Jesus comes, and they don't catch any fish. The fishing is not productive. And so Jesus opens their eyes. And he doesn't just open their eyes to see him, but rather he says, cast your net into a different place. You're fishing in the wrong place. So Jesus gives them a good spot to do their work. And we might say that part of having our eyes opened by the resurrected Christ is to be given a good spot to work. Sometimes our work in the church feels very fruitless. We say we spend time in this area, and what do we have to show for it? Well, maybe not much. Well, maybe it's because we're fishing in the wrong area. So, Jesus, give us the spot where our work will bear fruit. And this is part of that vision question. Jesus, give us the vision to know where to invest our time and our gifts so that, in fact, our catch will be full. And this is a great matter for your prayers, a great topic for your prayers. Jesus, what is the spot, or where is the place that we should invest our energy so that our catch will be full? We've been talking about this in various parts of the church. God, we're ready. We're ready for you to give us a full catch. We're ready for you to bless us and our ministries. And so now let our catch be full, but maybe only after you tell us where to put down the nets, oh God. So this is the second part of the story that I want to talk to you about, which is sometimes the passions that we have, we get a little bit tired or we get exhausted, and so we simply go back to what we've always done. We go back to old habits. And the disciples, what did they know? They know how to fish, so they go back to that. And so Jesus now calls them, and he opens their eyes and says, yes, here's a place to catch, but now I'm taking you and giving you a different job. And that's where we have that interchange with Peter, where Jesus invites him to feed his sheep. And if that's something you want to review, because it's actually an important text, go back and watch the last part of the video from February 3rd, and you'll hear that interchange. What does it mean when Jesus says, Peter, do you love me? And he says, yes. And that gives us some more depth to the story. So our Easter mission continues to be the same. As the Father has sent me, so I send you. Go and do my work of forgiveness. Announce the empty tomb. Sometimes Jesus has to encounter us again and again to kind of get us on board with the work, and he's willing to do that. And so where is it that Jesus needs to redirect your passion? He's not sucking it out of you like, don't be passionate. Rather, he's saying, no, take what you're passionate about and now apply it to the life that we share together. Not only that, but ask yourself, are there old habits that you go back to? Are there places where Jesus needs to reshape you? And then finally, make it a matter of your prayers. God, open our eyes, give us vision, so that we see your future for this church, that this church might be a place where your will is done. We'll see you on Sunday.